Today I've put together something super fun for you, the ultimate ink mashup. I've compiled a bunch of different inking videos from the past 5 years, and I put the best of the best all into one mashup. I tried to make the audio sound all the same, but hey, listen, when I first started out, I used my son's gaming headset and I did my voiceovers in the closet. So I have come a little further. I've upped my game a little bit, so bear with me about the audio. But anyway, Ultimate Ink. I answer all your questions about ink. I show you a ton of different inking techniques. I actually found the video where the word swinking was born, right? You know, swinking. If you follow me, you should know swinking. If you don't follow me, you're going to learn all about swinking today. I talk about how you can use your white pigment ink pad. I mean, there's a whole bunch in this. So get ready, sit back, get your cup of tea, get your cup of coffee, hot cocoa, your soda, your booze, whatever it is you do, and get ready to let's mash it up and learn all about inks and the fun techniques you can do with them.
All right, next up is ink swiping. I just love me some ink swiping. Love it, love it, love it. So this is just regular, again, white colored cardstock. And I'm just going to go and swink. No, swipe. I guess that's swiping and inking together. We're swinking on some inks here. I cracked myself up. And just using different colors, whatever was on my desk. I put a whole bunch of colors of inks out on my desk, and I'm just reaching for whatever was calling to me at that moment. And I just love this background. To take it one step forward, I can flick on some water. It's not watercolor cardstock, but I'm using very little bit of water, so it was okay, and I flicked it on, and then I get those water droplet looks as well. So check this out. Isn't this cool? All right, the next technique I want to show you is brush swiping, similar to what we did with the ink pads, but with a brush. And I am going to use a brush I got in a pack off of Amazon for ink blending. This is one of the smaller, narrow brushes, and I'm just basically picking up the ink on the brush and swiping it down. And I like how a lot of the ink is gathered up at the top, and then it gradually fades away as I swipe down. Just a cool look, super easy to add to a background. That's a watercolored piece that I did a long time ago, and I thought it would look great with just a little bit of something, a little bit of ink, and I think that's really cool. Ink smushing. Smush, 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 smush. I love me some ink smushing. So I'm going to use my Misty to help me this time. So I'm going to take some ink and I'm going to smush it right onto the door of my Misty. I did spritz it with some water, and then I'm just pressing some watercolored cardstock there. And I'm using the door to lift it up so I can see through on the other side. So I can see if I've pressed where I want to press, if I need to pick up more ink, put down more ink. It's just helping me show where all my petals of color are. And I love how this one turned out. This one is just pretty. And I'm going to do it again this time. One more time. But I love being able to see through what I'm doing. I'm using more intense colors this time. Background here. Last up is edge distressing. This is something that I love doing, but I haven't done it in a long time. You take your ink, you take any kind of blending tool that you have, and you go around the edges with the ink, and it just completely changes the look of the card there. Those are some florals I freehand watercolored eons ago. Time to pull this together in a card, and I thought I would create a little, I don't know, little halo look with some blue right around the edges here. This is Distress Oxide inks. Any inks that you have will work for this. Any kind of blending tool you have as well will work for this.
All right, let's get into the swinking. First, let's do negative space swinking. I'm using this is a stencil, and it has the actual masks, which would be the rectangle, and the negative space, which is what I'm using right here. And I sprayed the back of it with pixie spray so it would be nice and sticky, and I stuck it down to my cardstock, and I'm basically just swiping. Now for this small area, I did find using mini ink cubes was easier. You can do it with large ink cubes, but it was just easier for me this way. And these, I only have a few mini ink cubes. I don't have many. And I'm just swinking away. Just hear that. That looks ugly. I know it does. It's about to look even uglier, but don't worry. It's going to come together in the end, I swear. So here I am. I took a blending brush and I am just swinking on around the edges to create kind of a shadow around that border. Then I grabbed a black pen and then I'm tracing around the border. That looks even
uglier, to be honest with you, but don't worry. Here's where it comes into play here. I'm taking a little blending brush, it's a little circle, use a Q-tip, use your finger, use whatever you got, use the top of an eraser head from the pencil, and just I'm adding little dots, which is like bokeh or something like that in photography, and check this out. Now this is an old stamp that I have. It's long retired, but I never will get rid of anything Harry Potter. But here's a look at this first background. I think it's pretty. It turned out great, even though it looked pretty ugly, didn't it? It's all right. I know it did. All right, acrylic block swinking is in the house. This is a rectangle acrylic block. I'm using Catherine Pooler inks here. Any inks that you have in your stash will work, any kind of acrylic block, any shape, whatever. Do use inks that are water reactive, water soluble. Don't use permanent inks because you won't get this effect. I just spritz some water on the block and I am just swinking with a little jiggy action. So I'm doing a little jiggy swinking. Let me do it again. So I've got a couple of different colors on here. Being careful not to take one pad over another, especially if the colors are very dark against a light pad, because I don't want to mess up my pad. So do take caution when you're doing that. Wet your block with water and just jiggy swink, jiggy swink. Who says you can't have a silhouette rainbow? I am doing some black. I am going to take my embossing pad and ink up. These are like little dots that make a little arch for the rainbow. And I'm going to ink that up with some embossing ink and go over it with some embossing powder. This powder was not very bright. I thought it was going to be neon pink. Moving on, it wasn't, but thank God the background is awesome. All right, so here I am, heat embossed in yellow, added some washi tape. I'm flicking on a little bit of white paint flicks and the card, and bada bang, 2 cards right there. Here's another swinked acrylic, swinked background with a little penguin. I need to finish that out. He needs a little sentiment, maybe a little friend. Here's all 3 cards I made with the acrylic swinked backgrounds. Shadow swinking. That's what we're going to do here. This is a watercolored piece I did eons ago. I'm going to add some shading and shadowing around the edges of the card. I'm going to add a little bit to the bottom of the stem there to make it look like dirt. It's like I'm aging this card effortlessly and beautifully. Here I am adding a little bit of dirt. I'm telling you. Okay. All right, direct swinking. This is the common practice with ink swiping or swinking. Take your ink and just swipe them directly to your cardstock. I wanted to show you side-by-side comparison. If you were to swipe it with a blending brush, you might like that look better. You can do ink swinking with a brush if you want to. It doesn't always have to be with the pad. So it's really whatever floats your boat here. So to the left, we've got some texture right here, and then this one is more smooth. Both pretty, both swinkable. Do it. Drip swinking. Same process. Get your ink to your paper. I did it with the direct swinking, and then I'm just spraying some water. This is not watercolor cardstock either. You probably should use watercolor cardstock. Watercolor cardstock is obviously built to handle water. But here it is, right? It's pretty. I got some drip looks going on here. This stamp is hilarious from Ellen Hudson. What about stencil swinking? We don't want to forget about that. You can swink right through your stencils. Now, when I'm doing this, all of the ink is actually sitting on top of the stencil. So if I was to lift it up, there wouldn't be much there. But I'm taking a microfiber cloth and gently just going in circular motions to just blend that ink right through the stencil. And when I lift it up, look at that. Look it. Love it. But a bonus, don't get rid of that. Just take your stencil, spray it with water, flip it over, and you can stamp with your stencil and get a second print. Check it. This is a masterpiece. Work of art, no sentiment needed, the end. Texture swinking. This is some glittered, textured cardstock. I'm going to swink right over the top. I'm doing little, I don't know, ziggy zags. I don't know what you want to call it. But you can add fun little designs. With this particular one, I did have to spray a sealer over it. And the same thing if you wanted to use mirrored cardstock as well. Because it's a slippery surface, the ink doesn't really set. So I sprayed a fixative spray right over the top of it, and I was able to swink on these not swinkable surfaces. Ooh. I'm going to start off with one of my favorite ways to use the white pigment ink, and that's with ink layering. Now, this is a shortcut if you want to layer I don't know, colors, whatever. You usually have to have 3 different shades. Well, here I'm going to show you how you can go ahead and ink up whatever you want to ink up, but then you can use your white ink pad to create those different layers. So I'm going in first with some spruce ink from Catherine Pooler to just stamp out the trees. And I'm using the Misty stamping tool, my stamp positioner. I love it. I'm also able to do some double stamping as well. This is Sandcastle, a brown ink from Catherine Pooler. And I'm going to go ahead and ink up the fence in brown. And to intensify that brown even further, I'm just going to double stamp it, another benefit of using the Misty positioner there. But this is absolutely beautiful as is. It's just stunning. But I want to kind of create an ink layering look. So I'm going to take my white pigment ink. I am using the scrapbook.com white pigment ink, and I'm just inking up kind of the tips and the edges wherever I want it to give the appearance almost of snow, if you will. So I'm actually doing ink layering, but in reverse. So most of the time you start with your lightest ink and you go darker. Here I'm just going in with the white. So I have softened the edge of the trees and some of the ground, and it's just beautiful. I'm going to go in and ink up a little bit more with the same ink, you know, not in the exact same places. I almost want to create it another layer, like a softer layer on some of those areas. And I mean, effortless. And this card is done. Now I'm going to make some of these I'm going to go ahead and turn into complete cards and show you the pictures, and others I'm just going to leave as backgrounds, and I can create something later. Oh, this is another one of my favorites. Create an overlay or transparency. Like for reals. Wait till you see this. So this is a little balloon stamps, and I'm using various color inks. I'm using Catherine Pooler inks, and you'll see me mix in a little bit of Distress oxides as well. It's kind of what I had on my desk, if you will. Sometimes I just use what's on my desk. It almost makes it easier because it's like right there. And all these colors just came together. So I am just stamping balloons. This just looks like a hot mess right now. You don't know what I'm doing. It looks like I'm just blowing big bubbles onto this card. It almost looks like a gumball machine. Kind of doesn't. I could turn this into a gumball machine. And here's where the white pigment ink comes in. I'm going to go and just ink right over some of the balloons, not all of them, but some of them, especially the ones that are overlapping, like the colors, and you know, when the 2 colors overlap, sometimes they're pretty, sometimes they're not. So I'm especially choosing the balloons to kind of overlay over the colors that didn't necessarily mix very well. They weren't little buddies. Now some of the ink is picking up and getting on that white pigment pad. I'm not worried. I just, when I'm done with all of this, I just swiped my ink pad onto my glass mat, and I also bought the ink refill, and then I just re-wetted my ink pad. It was not a big deal at all. And here's a look at this birthday card. Isn't that cute? Don't you love those balloons? And here's a close-up of that white pigment ink and how it just created this beautiful transparency or overlay. Now, you can do heat embossing with the white pigment ink because pigment ink stays wet longer. So at first I was going to use a white piece of cardstock, and then I said, no, you're not going to be able to see that. So I'm going to switch it up and get a blue cardstock. But sometimes when I use my embossing ink pad, it's clear, right? Embossing ink is clear, and I don't see where I stamped. So if I'm trying to do specialty embossing or mixing colors, I don't know where I stamp. So this is where my white pigment ink comes in. This is where I got smart, decided to switch it out to a blue panel. So here I am. I'm using my anti-static tool, which I do every time I heat emboss. It's just easier. Just trust me on that. Just trust me. Use the anti-static tool. You will thank me. And then I'll sprinkle on a couple different shades of Wow embossing powder. All right, so I am choosing embossing powders that are opaque, which means you'll be able to see them on any color cardstock that you use. There are translucent embossing powders which will pick up the color of the cardstock you're using. So I'm making sure that I chose opaque and melted that powder. And then I have this beautiful, beautiful background right here with all of these different color embossing powders. Some are metallics. They were kind of like a different gradient of embossing powders. This is also something fun to mass produce. Just stamp a bunch of backgrounds with the white pigment ink, sprinkle on the embossing powders, and you could have a bunch of backgrounds to use later. Another thing I love to do is shadow stamping. Chose some dark cardstock. I got smart here as the video went on, and I'm going to ink up this beautiful floral image. This is where using my Misty really comes in handy. I mean, it's just like, I got to use it. There's no way I would be able to do without it. I shifted my card over a tiny little bit. That stamp at the top was mounted. I never moved it. So all I did was shift my cardstock over a teeny tiny bit. And then I'm inking this up several times with this Distress Oxide ink that I had. I wanted to make sure that that color is going to show. So once I'm satisfied that you guys are going to, well, nope, not satisfied yet. Need to keep inking it up because I need it to show on camera. I can see it, but I need it to really be intense so you guys can see it on camera, or you'll just think this is really boring. So here's that. So I shifted it a tiny little bit. And so I've got the orange and the white. So the white almost acts like it's a little outline, if you will. So here I am on some brown cardstock, or it's not brown, craft cardstock. I'm using that same ink, oxide. I went ahead and stamped it several times. I decided to take that out of the video because you don't want to see me doing the same thing over and over and over again. So here I am. I moved the cardstock just a tiny little bit, and I mean a tiny bit. And then I'll go in and add the ink. And again, I'll have another outlined look here. That's my Gryffindor Harry Potter sweatshirt you keep seeing in the sleeve. It's got a little emblem on the arm. Anyway, so another way you can use white pigment ink is to soften your colors. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have stamped things that either turned out too bright or I ended up not liking the colors or something. I love how it looks now, but here I'm going to go in and add purple on purpose because I'm going to mess it up. I like the left side. I like the right side. I do not like the middle. See, no. It just is not working for me. So I'm going to make sure I clean my stamp off good. Hello, white pigment ink. I'm going to go ahead and ink that up very well. I have also re-inked my pad since the card before last. So this ink pad is very juicy. And then I'll stamp right in the same spot. Thank you, Misty Stamping Tool. And everything is nice and soft and just very subtle. So here's what it looked like before I stamped it with the white pigment ink, and here's what it looked like after. You can clearly see the difference. I didn't want it that light, so once the pigment ink dries, I can go ahead and just re-ink it however I want it to be, right? So let me give you a little look at this. So I'm just kind of inking it up. Again, I'm taking my microfiber cloth there and just softening up some of those hard lines, and I'll go ahead and stamp over the dry ink. Make sure your pigment ink is dry. And then I've got a beautiful card here. You can also do the same thing on dark colored cardstock as well. So that's just leftover ink I had on my stamp, the oxides, onto some black cardstock, and then I'm going to do the same thing, ink it right over the top. If you have colored pencils and you like it, you can totally color right over the pigment ink. So I stamped this a bunch of times, these flowers or whatever, these little doodads, cute little stamps from Altenew, and then I handed this card over to my daughter, and she colored right over the top of this. She used colored pencils. I'm not going to do it on camera because I can't color. She is 7 and she can do a better job than I could do with pencils.
Let's do some acrylic block swinking. Any acrylic block size you have will work. Just go ahead and swink your ink pads directly onto the block. Try not to have the colors overlap on the pad so you don't transfer ink. Go ahead and spray that acrylic block with some water and make sure there's no harsh line. And then go ahead and press your block down. Now if you lift it straight up, you're going to get that weird look here. Let me show you again. So you got that line there. Just take your block and just kind of jiggy it. Just shake it onto the watercolor cardstock. That is watercolor cardstock. And once it dries, you get this pretty look here. Now you can take the same water that's left on your block and just jiggy it down a piece of watercolored cardstock. That is all I did. Leftover ink, jiggied it down on a second piece of cardstock. And then I got that result. And I was able to create these 2 cards with it. Let's do some plaid swinking. We're going to do it a couple of ways. First, I'm using my ink pad here. If you have the minis, you will get thinner lines, but I don't, so I made it work. And I'm just going over and swinking on just little dashes here. Don't worry that there's more colors in some area than others. It doesn't matter. This is where you get to know your inks and figure out what colors work great together. This is regular white cardstock, by the way. This is not watercolored. And just swink until you're happy with how it looks to create a plaid. That's really all there is to it. I loved how this looked and created a card with this background. Now you can do stencil swinking a plaid. I slowed this down because you can actually get 3 backgrounds from one sitting with this. So I've gone ahead and I'm going to ink up. I've got 3 different colors here and I'm just pressing it through the stencil. Now you have to be sure that you see the ink going in between the lines onto the paper there. So I'm being very careful. A lot's going on the stencil, but not a lot's going through the blank spaces, if you can see. So I'm just really taking my time with this cranberry fizz to make sure all the color is there. It's going to be a light color, but that's okay. That's what we want. So then I'm going to lift it up and I've got my first print.
right? We're going to create a plaid from this. You can leave it as is, or we're going to create a plaid. But before moving on, go ahead and spray that stencil a little bit with some water, grab some watercolored cardstock, and then press your cardstock directly onto that stencil. And now you're going to get a second print. So I'm just pressing it. When you're using water and watercolor cardstock, give it an extra second for the watercolor ink to transfer. And then look at that. That is so cool. I'll show you a better picture of that in just a second. But now I'm going to take the same stencil. I'm going to lay it over another piece of watercolor cardstock, and I'm just going to clean it. I didn't flip it over to transfer the ink. I'm simply cleaning my stencil. And then look at the result there. So I've got 3 prints here from one passing, if you will. To create a plaid, just turn your paper or your stencil, whichever one you prefer, the opposite direction the lines are going, and then we're going to do the exact same thing again. Find a color that you like that works well together, and just start swinking, doing the same exact thing we did the first time. You can see most of the ink is going on the stencil. So again, if you're using any kind of stencil that has open spaces, make sure you can see the ink transferring between, where the open space is. And that's really all there is to it. Turn the paper if you need to. I'm right-handed, so I always have to flip it around to get that other edge there. Don't be afraid to lift the stencil up gently to make sure you've got good coverage, like I did right here. Oh, and I did tape the stencil to the paper from the back, just so it's not moving all around that's why you see those 2 pieces of tape there. So I just basically taped it from the back side, or you could use your pixie spray, stencil spray, but I didn't feel like looking for it. So this worked for me. And once I was able to see I like that transfer, look at that cute little plaid. Isn't that cute? But remember, we're going to make 2 more prints from this. So the first thing we're going to do is spray the stencil. All right, because we need to move the ink around. So I've got the stencil with the ink facing me, sprayed it. I'm going to take that print there that we did the first time, turn the lines completely the opposite direction. You can see I double checked myself. Press it down, give it good pressing motion so the ink has time to transfer. Whee! Whee! This is like real life, real speed. It's a little slow. But anyway, I wanted to slow down because we're doing 3 prints here. And then what are we going to do here? You know it. We're going to clean the stencil. So I left it, all the ink, everything face up. I didn't flip it over. And now I'm just cleaning my stencil. Just like that. Easy peasy, 3 prints. You got yourself some plaids. I love plaids. I think it's fun because these are not perfectly straight lines. This is something I really love. They're a little wonky. I'm a little wonky, so it fits. And here's the cards. Of course, I made cards with all 3 of these backgrounds because I just love the plaids. And don't be afraid to add washi tape. That little black strip on the left, that's washi tape. So don't be afraid to add a little jing to your cards. I'm just saying. Drip swinking. This is so easy, you have no idea. This is watercolor cardstock. I am basically applying a lot of ink at the top of the card there. You can see I'm being very heavy-handed. Watercolor cardstock, gotta have it. And then spray from the top. Spray it, whack it on your surface, and you get these beautiful drip lines.
Right, inks is a big thing when you're doing ink blending. You need good inks and good paper. These are the 2 inks I have. I love. They ain't going anywhere. Catherine Pooler inks to the left and Distress Oxides to the right. So I chose color families similar per brand, and I'm going to do some ink blending. So the first thing I'm doing is ink blending with Catherine Pooler inks. Again, if you use brushes like similar to this with a bigger head, you're going to be able to get more of a smooth blending. Now, Catherine Pooler inks are very pigmented, so I love those bold colors. If you're not into bold colors, just don't be as heavy-handed when you're blending. Ink blending, if you're doing a lot of ink blending, it's going to hurt your hands and your arms. So just keep that in mind too, because especially if you're working on a big piece of paper. But anyway, you just keep basically blending until you get the color you want. You can use the same color and just be more heavy-handed in certain areas, and you'll get, a bunch of shading on your card with one color. Here, I'm trying to create a little gradation here. So I've got a yellow and an orange, and now I'm going to go in with the red using all different brushes. Again, my favorite brushes are the Amazon brushes with the big heads. you know, but I don't have that many to showcase on this technique. But these kinds of brushes are my favorite out of all of the blending that I use. But everybody has their own preference. You might like the dome blenders. You might like brush blenders. I don't know. There's so many different kinds. Who knows? Use what you have, but there are options, right? And they're all usually pretty inexpensive. So I've gone ahead and did some blending there. And then on the other side was the Distress Oxide. Same exact technique. I just blended with those 3 colors of Distress Oxides. You can see the difference. It's not a perfect color match, but at least I kept it in the same color family. So you have very smooth, muted looks to the right and very intense looks to the left. It's more smooth on the right because of the formulations of the oxides, but then I prefer the bold colors of Catherine Puller inks. But I'm going to show you tricks. What if your blend's not perfect? What if you have strokes in there? What if this? What if? I'm going to show you what to do. But some tricks to your blending. You can go over a stencil with one similar color that you used on your backgrounds, or even a completely different color, and that will add something to your background, but also cover up mistakes in your blending if you have any. The 2 brands of inks that I used in today's video are water reactive inks, so you can even flick on some regular water with your finger or a paintbrush, and that will hide some of the imperfections of the blending. All right, so you can see what I did to the right there. I just used the red color and of the oxide panel. I'm going to do the same thing to the panel here with the Catherine Puller inks, being more heavy-handed. Because I just love bright, bold, in-your-face colors. Not always, but let's just face it, 99.9999999% of the time, I like bold colors. So here's, a look, right? All right, let's do a little more. Let's flick on a little something because these are water reactive. I have this gold paint stuff that's been sitting, I'm surprised it's not like solid. I don't know how long it's been there. So I decided to flick on a little bit of this gold Winsor & Newton ink. I don't know. I guess it's metallic ink or something. I don't know. Anyway, it's super cool how it sits on top of the ink like that blended background. Now I'm going to flick on some Perfect Pearls and I'm going to make a oopsie. Look at that. The lid just fell right off. Are you kidding me? I kept going with it, but in my mind, I've probably got, some not so happy words, but I'm going to fix it. And this is how I fixed it. Grab yourself a sentiment or a die cut or something. In this case, it was the hello, and I just covered that sucker right up. Nobody's going to know. Nobody, unless they rip up my card. And if they rip up my card, I ain't never sending them another one. All right, so that's what I did with that card. And this card, all these things were pulled out of my magic mug, and I assembled this. I used a complementary color on this card, on the flowers. So those colors sit across from each other on the color wheel. So it's really like a cool, of course, like me, in your face, colored card. I swear, having a color wheel is everything. If you don't know how to make one, I got a video. I'll show you how to do it. It's linked below in the description. It's good for everything. All right, so that was today's video, Ink Blending 101. Hope you learned a little something. You don't need to be a perfect ink blender connoisseur. You can do what you can do, and if you need to add a little something over the top to cover some imperfections, super easy to do.